Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. We are joined by Sophie Yohannan, Maru Patel, and Alipio de Vieira. Today we're going to be talking about AI and then also DI, which Alipio is going to explain to us. So I'd like to start out by kind of explaining how AI and healthcare align. Right now, what is the current situation of AI? Um, Either Sophie or Maru, if you have experience with working on that.
In healthcare, I think it's taking off. We already had a lot of AI in healthcare prior to the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has kind of accelerated things forward out of necessity. The easiest example is telehealth, right? We are able to schedule and see patients virtually, and then order testing and see the results virtually. And then, right now, decisions about healthcare treatments, diagnostics, differential diagnostics are still being done. Once we receive the results, those are still being done by humans. And then, there's a treatment regimen going forward. But we already have programs and plans in place for that decision making. Depending on what results come back for patients, there are algorithms already in place that are being tested now to be able to sift through some of that diagnostic information to figure out, what are our options moving forward? What are the treatment alternatives? And then what is the best option? So which option will give the patient the greatest chance of recovery or survival or longevity? So it's starting really at that broad level, I think. And, we can talk about this all day because at every level there's AI being integrated into everything. And I just recently saw there's a facility here in New York where you can have all of your medical records uploaded, and then you have your testing done at this one central place, and all of your physicians and nurses and healthcare professionals at different locations can access your records and results and images from this one place, and it keeps your records in a one central location for the lifetime of your medical care. And you can also access your own records and images and diagnostic results from that place. And you don't necessarily have to travel everywhere to have that testing done. So some of it can be done by, traveling nurses who draw blood and then ship the specimen back to the central location. So now the patient doesn't always have to go to the lab, to the clinic, to the hospital to get that testing done. Just one step.
And are you seeing I hear a lot about diagnostics using AI or having computer programs that can read x-ray scans or can read different, it kind of making choices about where the patient's next steps are, not necessarily having that doctor making the complete decision. The doctor may step in and agree or disagree with the AI and how it's moving patients forward. But where do you see that kind of technology headed? Is that something that's being embraced right now, or is it a little?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that it's completely embraced yet, because we still haven't had enough time to test it and see, how it's going to work. But yeah, I completely see in the future, in the next couple of decades, us using that AI, those algorithms more often to assist. It's first going to be to assist a physician in making those decisions and coming to a conclusion about which direction to take in terms of treatment, and then eventually, I think I think AI will come down to basically making the decision, and it will be up to the physician and healthcare professionals to actually put into action those decisions. That's, very far away, I think, but I think we're taking small steps in that direction.
And Marion does ask a pretty good question here. What are the concerns being expressed about AI patient privacy? I think, we all see that in our field. HIPAA is, for the US, that is our kind of go-to for privacy. And Canada has their own privacy requirements, as does EU, which tends to be a little more stringent than the US. I think we do in the US bump into that quite a bit, seeing that the EU is so determined on not leaking any kind of patient data or any identifiable information, whereas the US is a little more lenient on that kind of thing. AIs need to be flexible in a way.
Yeah, I think part of the reason is because in Europe, there are more central databases where you can access the same patient's health records from different locations, different countries, different hospitals, whereas in the US, we have so many different databases. Forget about across states, even within the same state, even within the same city, each hospital has their own electronic medical record and other databases besides that. If one patient goes to two different hospitals or one office that doesn't communicate with a hospital in the same city, those records are not automatically transferable. So there has to be a request with a HIPAA release signed by the patient to get, send records from one electronic medical record to another. So we don't necessarily have the same concerns as they have in the EU because the data is centrally located there. It's not centrally located here. And I hope we can get there because I think it would be much easier. Treatment would be much easier if we had a team approach and a whole patient approach instead of looking at one diagnosis with one patient. Look at the whole patient and their entire medical history and how they, one system, their kidneys will respond to their heart failure, for example. As Alipio knows very well, multiple systems affect each other. They're not separate. So if you have a pulmonologist and a cardiologist and a nephrologist, they really should be working together. They really should know all of the parts of the patient's medical history and attacking those problems together from all sides. So from that angle, I think, a combined, a centrally located database and access would be really beneficial. But before we get there, we do have to strengthen our privacy laws because otherwise we would have a problem. Because you're right, it's not as stringent as, at least not as stringent as the EU. So.
And going back a little bit to, AIs that are already in place that work quite efficiently, I'd say my experience with pharmaceutical products, that we have an AI that's running to catch drugs that counter each other or have an interaction. Yeah. And they'll flag in the system for the pharmacist. I think, we don't consider that necessarily like an AI, but it really is an AI. Yeah. And it's very helpful to the pharmacist, of course, helping them when they're so busy. I mean, right now I've seen so many lines at the pharmacy. I know that they need all the additional assistance that they can get, shorthanded. Maru, where do you see AI going from your perspective? And do you see things like the pharmacy check that is very helpful in your field?
It is helpful. However, sometimes it creates too many alerts that you automatically go on the bypass. So there is a fine line of how many for example, you're taking Lasix and you're taking potassium. So it will flag, oh, you're taking these two drugs. Well, One is to reduce, it does reduce, so you're adding a supplement, but it still sends you an alert. So for the seasoned people, it would be easy to bypass that. For somebody who's brand new to coming in, it will cause like a backup until they get comfortable. It will just make things go worse. So I guess for that, we would need to, for each pharmacist, they would have to figure out, do I want to go to the high alert, medium, or low? And if you go too low, you're bypassing the important ones. But I think all that comes with practice. And right now we have technicians who are doing the fill. And when they have alerts, the pharmacist is called to bypass those. And so it does help having an extra pair of eyes. First would be the technician and then the pharmacist. So
that's interesting. I didn't know that there was a way to program the alerts. High, medium, low. That's very interesting. And Alipio has joined us. He comes from more of the tech background, and he's been quite focused on a decision intelligence. And Alipio, could you kind of explain to us what is decision intelligence and how does it fit in with AI?
Okay, the primary difference between decision intelligence and artificial intelligence is that with artificial intelligence, you hear data-driven, databases, data collection. Whereas with decision intelligence, it recognizes that in some specific applications, the intelligence may reside in human sources and should not be automated. An example I use is, and Taya's knows this since I told it to her a couple of days ago, but it's something that everybody can relate to. First of all, in the United States, one of the most popular sports is American baseball, right? And almost everyone knows that of the Los Angeles Dodgers, which is like one of those legacy leading edge technologies. Now, a couple decades ago, there was this, what I would call kind of artificial intelligence-based data collection system, but applied to baseball players. You may have heard of the term Moneyball. It was first used by the Oakland Athletics, and utilized in this system, they were able to lay bare the shortcomings of all the typical myths and legends that baseball scouts and baseball organizations use to pick baseball players. Now, the Oakland Athletics have not been able to use this technology to secure a world championship, which is the goal of every baseball organization in the league. But then this technology was then taken up by the Boston Red Sox, who then utilized this technology to win several championships. So the Los Angeles Dodgers took note of that and then brought in the technology for themselves. Now, the reason I'm bringing up the Los Angeles Dodgers is it shows the shortcomings of having only a data-driven methodology in making decisions. Okay. Give you an example. A baseball team would play, I believe, 162 games in a single season. They have now that every single baseball game will generate 1 terabit of data. And a single baseball pitch by a single pitcher in a single inning will generate 20 discrete pieces of information. That's mind-boggling when you think about it. So the thing is, where the Dodgers were using this data was to make decisions, and last year the shortcomings of this approach was laid bare. Specifically, as I mentioned, they used the artificial intelligence system, the Moneyball system. They would say, oh, okay, in this situation, 8th inning, left-handed pitcher, the opposing batter will fail 20, maybe 18 times out of 20 if he faces a left-hander. So they pull the specific person from the Los Angeles bullpen, right? The problem is when you have this type of system is that you are treating baseball players like data. They are human beings. And what ended up happening is they were relying on this one free agent acquisition to fulfill the specific need that they saw as a shortcoming based on their data.
Mhm.
Well, they burned this pitcher out, and he developed a phenomenon known as dead arm. So in this crucial playoff game, this pitcher was unavailable.
Mhm.
And therefore, because this pitcher was not available and he had the best shot at winning the playoff game, the Dodgers lost and they got kicked out of the playoffs and were not able to compete for a world championship. So you may be asking, so how would decision intelligence play a role here? Well, decision intelligence would be more in the step back in designing the original system and saying, okay, we are dealing with the management of human beings. Therefore, maybe we should have, in designing the original artificial intelligence system, maybe have also recording injury histories of all the players, or maybe having like a doctor make the call, be involved in the call, like maybe raising a warning, hey, you're overusing this player,
Mhm.
right? So that would be the difference between an artificial intelligence and decision intelligence. Decision intelligence is more like when you are laying out, what type of decisions are we making? Therefore, that determines what data you should be using, therefore, what type of statistics, but also you are integrating the human side, which is just, or maybe more important, as the data. So this will get you out of the trap of being focused only with data driven decisions.
This applies to healthcare also, Alipio. You bring up such a good point. And beyond the dead arm, beyond the medical condition of the pitcher, what about the mood of the pitcher? What if he just lost an aunt last night? You know, what if what if his child got into trouble? What if, who knows what happened, and what emotional state that pitcher is in? And that is where the human part comes in. And it's the same reason why it's going to be a long time before AI can really take over large parts of healthcare decision making, because there are so many variables, there are so many emotional variables that come into play with decision making, especially with patients, and every patient responds to a treatment differently, even with the same diagnosis, the same number of years, the same similar medical background, they all still respond a little bit differently. So without having that human involvement, I think it'll be really tough to get all the angles in, to have an AI or DI solely make those decisions. And I think that's kind of where we're going in the short term, is integrating AI with human decision making. But yeah, I'll be very curious for the future. But I have to drop off. It was great talking to all of you. Alipio, I look forward to hearing more from you. And Taya, thank you for having me. Maru,
Thank you. Thank
see you
you,
later.
Sophie. Bye.
Hi, Sophie.
Bye.
Um, so I did want to go back to that point a little bit about how AI is filling in the gaps. And Sumana Jetty, who has a wellness show, she had been talking about how she read an article where 75% of healthcare workers are at risk of leaving the field because they don't feel supported and they are getting burnt out. And that would occur by 2030 if we don't find a way to solve, this problem for our healthcare workers. And I'm seeing it here in Kansas City. We have a lot of doctors that are retiring early or leaving the field altogether to do other things, like completely different things, like real estate. I mean, just leaving. So I see that AI could fill a gap there in helping doctors maybe manage caseload or workload. What are your thoughts, Maru, on using AI as a support system, or other ways to use AI as support for doctors?
I think it would be great for them to have that support. I mean, we can't just rely on AI. Like Sophie said, we have to have the human decision. It will take some of the difficult decisions out of that. I don't want to say difficult, because the education, is,
Mhm.
and the human decision is very important, but it will take some of the stress off them, I think.
Yeah, if there could be a way that the AI kind of can group people or catch things that maybe the
Hmm.
doctors wouldn't be able to catch, but still have that, like Alethea said, that human element in there. It's just hard to know how much of a human element we'll be able to have if people are retiring early and leaving.
It, I'm thinking also in a stressful situation, it kind of gives a different view. Oh, maybe I didn't consider this point of view. Let me see, explore that, and
Mhm.
possibly give a better outcome for the patient.
Yes, and we have a comment here from Joyce, who she is an innovator in this space. She created her own healthcare app, so please follow her for more information on that. And she says, yes, we need human intelligence. That's what led to my insights from my data. AI can help, but it was a matter of looking into things differently, especially how food affects the heart rate. That's where Joyce's passion is connecting heart rate to food reaction. And we have another comment from Shoko, and she is saying it is critical that a patient can have that decision comfort. And we've all been patients, I think, on both sides, being that in the healthcare industry and as a patient. So maybe Alipio, what would your perspective as a patient be if you knew AI was playing a part of your healthcare? How does that really impact you as a patient?
Well, from my perspective, being informed on both sides, patient as a technologist, my question is the data that the AI is making a recommendation, does it apply to my specific profile? Right? Or, are we talking about a data set in which I'm not represented in? That is the first question I have is, and we all know this, the infamous example of surveillance AI misidentifying African Americans because African Americans were not representative in the original data sets that trained the AI. So that is my number one question: is am I represented in the data set? And then the second thing is that is the doctor or the specialist who is interpreting the data to me, does this person have enough experience understanding my situation to be able to communicate clearly to me exactly why this recommendation is happening?
Mhm.
Because I've seen too many cases of misdiagnosis, or just because they want to kind of like push this patient down the assembly line of getting them out of the hospital. I've actually, I know of a former patient in which they actually were about to send her out without confirming that the life-saving medication she needed was available at the pharmacy that she was subscribed to. And she felt all alone. She felt there was no one defending her, no one explaining her situation, and she feels kind of burned from her experience as a patient. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but that's what I got.
Yeah, I think it adds definitely a layer of complexity trying to explain how an AI would be beneficial to the patient in a way the patient would understand, especially when we are already limited with the patient facing time we have, and doctors are already feeling difficulty, just explaining the day to day interactions with the patient, but then adding on this complex software, it could be very difficult. Maru, did you have any other examples of how you feel patients may be will see AI and how it plays a part in their healthcare?
Not really, but I think having patients have access to the healthcare records and having a central database would be important. I have a friend who right now cannot get his medical records from a hospital. And so for him to be able to say, okay, I can get my records today to send off to another doctor or wherever he needs to send off would be easier than him, it's taken him 2 weeks and he's still not getting anywhere with this hospital. So I think centralized would be nice, but my concern with privacy again is also there. My fear that there's always somebody's database has been leaked, so your data is out there in the public or dark web, and I'm not too fond of that either. And
yes, definitely. The
I do have
compliance.
to run. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay, Maru. We're gonna wrap up
Okay,
now.
so thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Maru, for joining us. And Lipio, did you have any closing thoughts on AI and DI and where we will stand in the future?
I just also want to point on the other side of the coin, in that the people that create the tools sometimes kind of fall short in communicating that this tool is not going to replace you as a professional. I think you may have heard several months ago there was a big flap with Google, who introduced this tool in the dermatology field, and basically the poor person that went to go talk to this, I guess, conference of dermatologists was basically almost tarred and feathered and run out, because pretty much 90% of the thing is this going to replace me? Am I no longer going to have a job? So again, a lot of, at least I see from my years in technology, is that there needs to be greater emphasis on the people creating the tools to better communicate that it is a tool, that you'll always be necessary. We need your expertise. And so we don't have the situation that happened several months ago with Google and the dermatologists.
Yeah, I think we hear that quite a bit. When I talk about technologies that can read X-ray scans, there are, there are technologists, humans that do that now. So we want to make sure that we preserve their jobs or have a way for them to be, like you said, making those decisions within that AI kind of environment. But well, thank you so much for your time, everyone. Really appreciate the comments. Marian, Shoko, Sumana, and Joyce, thank you so much for joining. It was a lot of fun. So we'll meet again next week. We'll have a new topic. So thank you, Alipio. Appreciate it. Bye.